Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this panel, this event, to meet many of you for the first time and see some friends from long ago as well. It's a real honor to be here. What I really want to talk about today is, I lead Microsoft's global cybersecurity public policy team, been in this role and this team for a little over 9 years and working on cybersecurity regulatory developments for a bit longer than that. And I view the moment that we're in for the development of cybersecurity regulation as a very key one for the topic of this panel and some other panels during this event for really strengthening trust and stability, for really enhancing our common resilience. And why I think it's such a key moment is that we're really doing something new. We're about to do something new. In some ways, we've already gotten started, but there's a lot of work still to do, which is to really develop and implement new security requirements for technology horizontally, and to do so in a way in which we're really measuring conformance with those requirements in a more robust way than we have been in the previous decade. And to appreciate where exactly we are in this moment and why it's so important, I just want to offer a quick example related to AI, because I think that's really on the top of everyone's mind appropriately. So I heard very recently someone provide this description that was sort of trying to position the impact of AI and what we can anticipate by looking back across other big revolutionary arcs that we've seen in the technology industry. The first one being the introduction of the PC, literally bringing personal computing power to individuals all over the world, to almost everyone. That was a huge arc, right? Another one that followed that was the internet, bringing the internet to everyone, bringing information to everyone. Third one being mobile computing and cloud computing, bringing those first two capabilities of computing and information to everyone more ubiquitously, more continuously, right? Those are incredibly powerful developments that we've seen. And as I was hearing someone recently give this description, they kind of put AI at that same level, right? That's going to have that kind of just foundational, incredibly broad, incredibly sort of exciting impact. And yet, in the description that I heard, it was really hard for people to sort of describe what they were really expecting with the same level of specificity, crispness, out of AI as they could for PC, for internet, for mobile and cloud, being where we are now in those arcs. And so there's this moment of thinking about right now, incredible potential to have that kind of impact, incredible potential to be that foundational for so much of what we do, and yet at the same time a lot of uncertainty, right? A lot of concern. And I think in a way, we're at that same moment with cybersecurity regulation, cybersecurity policy development for this new kind of horizontal technology regulation that we're trying to do, right? I think it is incredibly exciting. It could have, right, an incredibly powerful impact on resiliency, on our trust and stability. But it's also really, having a lot of complexity to it and a lot of ways where, we could imagine that it doesn't have as good, as strong of a security impact as we all commonly want it to, as we all commonly need it to. So I want to just offer a couple of thoughts about how we can really leverage this moment in cybersecurity regulatory development to have that kind of impact that I think we all commonly are desiring from these developments. I think we could talk all day about this, and I think we will, and to some extent over the next couple of days. But two kind of things that I think about that are very top of mind in trying to leverage the most that we can out of this moment. One, the kind of the security requirements themselves and some of the complexity embedded there. And the other, I think about the ecosystem of requirements, right? So how security requirements in one jurisdiction and others interact, how security requirements in one policy domain and others interact, right? So there's complexity in both of those. So I'll start with the security requirements themselves. So this, I think, it sounds like it should be so obvious and easy, right? We're developing security requirements. We want them to enable the best security outcomes. Surely we can do that, it's simple enough. But I think there's something deceptive there, where there's oftentimes tension in exactly how we can get to that best security outcome, right? Because we're dealing with a really sort of complex set of technologies and users, and the impacts can be hard to fully appreciate. So I'll give an example of what I'm talking about, and I think maybe this topic will come up in some other context today. It's coordinated vulnerability disclosure, right? The idea that we have a lot of vulnerabilities in technology products. We want a way to be able to manage those in an ongoing way, and so when someone finds a vulnerability, we encourage them to report that vulnerability to an organization or company that is in a place to provide a mitigation, to develop a patch, disseminate that, right? This is something that I think is really interesting because it's been an issue since the late 2000s, as early as I started working on these issues, where there's a really difficult tension in that area where there's good reason to go faster and there's good reason to go slower, right? And there's been a lot of pressure over the years from security researchers, from others that find and report vulnerabilities to really and try to have everyone patch and provide a security update to their product more quickly. And there have been different ways that we've tried to put pressure on that, right? And we can all understand why. That feels like a good thing, right? If we have a vulnerability in a product, we want it to be patched as quickly as possible. We want people to be protected as quickly as possible. At the same time, there's good reason to maybe go a little bit slower. We see if that process of patching is really rushed, there's a lot of complexity there, right? You need to actually develop a patch that's not going to break anything else. And so if you go too fast, you might develop a really poor patch. And then you might have to develop additional patches. And you might see that users don't actually implement that patch, right? Because they are anticipating problems or they're dealing with patching fatigue because there's so many different versions. And so there's this tension there, right, where we want to go faster, we want to go slower. It's a polarity that can't easily be resolved. There are benefits with both approaches. I think of other kinds of polarities that we all deal with in our everyday life, like, do I want to be proactive or reactive? I want to be both, right? And so I think of the same thing for these kinds of security requirements, right? A lot of times there's good reason to be pulled in either direction, and we really need to think about how we can get to the best security outcome in a way that manages that tension. So the security requirements themselves, we have to really stay focused on what are we actually doing in these security requirements and kind of follow the thread as it takes us on a potentially circuitous, complex route. And then the second piece, the ecosystem of security requirements. Again, I think one thing that's really interesting about this moment is there's a ton going on. So there's efforts to develop horizontal kind of cloud security regulation in pretty much every region of the world that I'm looking at. There's also efforts to develop software or connected devices, kind of horizontal security regulation. We have government cloud security procurement programs. We have new certifications. We have kind of operational security requirements being developed for essential and important services. We have incident reporting. So there's a lot of kind of issues that are being tackled that impact technology. This is happening across every major region in terms of jurisdictional activity. In some cases, it's also happening in sectors. And so that all, again, is very understandable. This is security is something that I think needs to be pursued in those horizontal ways as well as in those kind of vertical risk scenarios. But we also really, really, really need interoperability and consistency across requirements. And so that's super complex to be able to pursue. I just want to spend one moment talking about why it is so important in terms of enabling security outcomes to really focus on that interoperability and consistency. We need a global vantage point to do cybersecurity really well. We need a global vantage point to do enterprise risk management really well, as any organization that's using technology has a global supply chain and may also have global operations. So you need to have global visibility into that to be able to manage that risk well at the organizational level. We also need interoperability because it means we can continue doing security innovation, which is really powerful. We can integrate SMBs into a global supply chain. We can really focus on doing the next best thing in security rather than sort of rebuilding some of the tools that we already have. We need global interoperability because we have 24/7 global security operations and incident response, and to be able to support organizations that are dealing with an incident and have that kind of ongoing investigation and the sort of handoff of findings and gaps to those that are globally kind of working on those incident response scenarios. We have to have that consistency, that interoperability as well, that ability to share data. And then the fourth reason is really coming back to the kind of topic du jour of AI. We really, really need global interoperability and the ability to share data to enable where we are having to go with AI cybersecurity. I think there have been some reports where we've shared publicly the way that in certain instances, like for example in Ukraine in the last couple of years, we have been able to leverage AI-powered cybersecurity tools to block sort of malware that we're seeing at first sight, something that we've never seen and we've not added into our security tools to be able to block malware, but rather something that at first sight an AI cybersecurity tool can block based on the context that it has about the likely risk associated with what it's seeing. And that's really where we're going with AI cybersecurity, the ability to be that agile, to do things like block malware at first sight. And we really, really, really must, because we know that threat actors are incredibly agile themselves. And so as defenders, we don't have those same capabilities and tools. We're gonna fall behind. And AI really, we think, gives us a chance to actually rebalance that equation and that challenge that we have with very agile threat actors. And so we really need global interoperability to enable that. So then, okay, last point, I promise, because I think maybe I'm going too long, is, so how do we do this, right? If we can all agree, we really want security requirements, we want the ecosystem of requirements to enable really good security outcomes. We can think about some principles for the security requirements themselves, and we can think about the kind of structure of how we go about doing this. Think about security requirements that have a few principles as a foundation for the approach, being risk-based and outcome-focused, really thinking through, like, what is the security outcome that this requirement is going to lead to when I'm understanding the full way that it could be implemented and how it impacts technology companies and users. The second piece is really focusing on enabling that kind of agility in our security requirements that we need to keep pace with very agile threat actors. So, one example that I've been thinking about a lot recently too is there's a ton of emphasis right now on implementing multi-factor authentication, MFA. Very important, makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, internally when I talk to our security engineers and security operations folks, they are looking past that because they are anticipating as we get MFA widely deployed, threat actors are going to have other avenues that they're going to use. And so we can't just rest with one thing that we know that works today, right? We have to have an ability to be very agile in our security requirements. And then the third piece is that kind of focus on interoperability and consistency and enabling that kind of flow of information that we need for cybersecurity. And I think there's a lot of complexity there. There's oftentimes, again, multiple kind of policy interests competing. I think about even the way that security is interacting with policy domains like sustainability, like sovereignty, like competition. And there's a lot of complexity there, but really being focused on how can we enable security outcomes? How can we address other risks that we're concerned about through transparency or other measures? And ensuring that we have that interoperability globally. And I think the final point is that going about developing requirements and being able to kind of understand the ecosystem of requirements so that we can get to those good security outcomes requires that we have a really good public policy making process and that very thoughtful about how we approach implementation. So when I think about the process, the most important thing to me is that there is a good public-private partnership process that really allows for kind of ongoing, kind of iterative exchange between stakeholder communities. What I have seen when we're really kind of in the nitty-gritty, like I'd give an example of years ago, I was working on FedRAMP, the US government's cloud security assurance program, and evolving some of the security requirements in that context. a lot of meetings that were kind of really focused on that, allowed a really good exchange between government and private sector partners, really understand what each kind of community was driving toward and how we could get to that common outcome. We really needed that iterative process. So a good public-private partnership that's iterative. And then an implementation process that's likewise iterative, has a phased approach, thinks about expanding scope over time, thinks about really allowing for a process of making more agile adjustments is, I think, really going to be foundational as we go forward. So again, thank you. And I think my main idea that I'd really love for all of us to kind of collectively stay focused on and work on is, again, how are we ensuring, let's be really precise and really reflective on everything that we're doing in that security impact, because we really need to leverage this moment to get that kind of common resiliency, that trust and stability that we're looking for from our technology. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.